should have said that like this is my third glass of wine. So if I'm rambling, sorry. I think that I read 26, 27 books in December, and there's not enough fluid in the world for me to talk for that long. So I'm going to hydrate with wine, and we're going to go down the list until I get tired of talking. But I think that we're going to descend into chaos kind of quickly because I have very strong wine. So I have a list on my phone in the order that I read them, and we're going to start with Between Two Fires, which is a book that I gave 4 stars. I listened to it on Audible. It was included in my membership, and this was very interesting. We're following this soldier. Let's back up. It's set in a historical setting, and this knight, not soldier, because we're in history, right? This knight is alive during a time where Britain and France is in the middle of like their 100 Years War. And if you don't know what the 100 Years War is, it is a time period in which France and Britain fought for 100 years almost. Actually, it was over 100 years. I think the war was like 112 years. Alexa, how long was the 100 Years War?
Here's something I found on reference.com. The 100 Years' War lasted from 1337 to 1453, making it 116 years long, although there were breaks in the conflict.
Alexa, stop. 116 years is how long this war lasted. And there is a sense of like biblical aspect that's happening in the plot, because while the two world leaders at this time, which was Britain and France for a long time, are battling it out, duking it out to the death to see who is going to gain the throne. I think they were fighting over the French throne. Right? But I'm not going to ask Alexa again because sis be tripping. Just Google it if you don't believe me, you know? So in the midst of this happening on like Earth, God and his angels are having like this battle as well. And the fallen angels that have been cast out to hell are upset. And God is gone. So there is 2 like holy angels that are defending the gates of like earth and also the gates of heaven, because God is on a vacation and no one has heard from him. And Lucifer and his people are just like, you know what? They're trying to wage war on like the heavens, but they're not getting anywhere. So Lucifer and his people are just like, you know what? He loved the humans. Let's wage war on the humans because he's not around to protect them. And there's not enough like holy angels, I guess, to defend the gates of heaven as well as earth. And so we're going to like spread them thin. We're going to attack the gates of heaven, and then we're also going to like attack earth where men live. One of the ways they do that is to release the 4 forms of the apocalypse on mankind. They release famine and war, which brings about the 100 Years of War, and pestilence, and just all these different things that are like plaguing mankind. So during this time period, there is an actual black plague that this author has turned into like a biblical warfare. So things that are occurring in this timeline that actually occurred in real history are being blamed as a result of the war that the demons are waging on mankind. So it is actually very, very interesting. And this knight was betrayed by his general, and so he decides that, you know what, forget the war. I don't really care anymore about the Brits or like the Saxons, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal and rob and cheat because I tried to be an honorable knight, but it didn't work out like that. This little girl stumbles into this barn and she's like, can you guys help me bury my father? And the band of thieves are like, are you stupid? It's a plague out here. He probably died of the plague or like the Black Death. We're not touching him. And she's like, but he needs to be buried. And they're like, no, but you're cute though. Why don't you come sit on this bench next to us? And this is literally like a little girl. Like, I don't even think she's gotten her period yet. She might be 10 or 12 or like 11. And this knight is like, y'all leave her alone. He doesn't really want to be a part of this like rapey situation. And they're not listening to him. And so he has to slay his entire band of thieves because as much as he's trying to pretend he's not a good person, he's still an honorable knight, and that's just a bad thing to do. So the little girl is very peculiar, and she's like, you have been assigned to me to take me to Paris because I have to fight the big final fight, and yeah, I'm gonna save mankind. He's like, yeah, cool, whatever. But things start to happen while she's like following him around, and they hook up with like this priest, and they go through like these different speculative biblical nightmares or like biblical horror stories, and the little girl has to like keep them on track because she is the chosen one. And they don't know if she's like Jesus reincarnate, but it challenges a lot of things that like this knight questions about his religion and whether or not he actually believes in God, and also the priest and the pope, because he believes in it, but seeing it in real life and like in the flesh is very different. Thought it was very interesting. I was let down by Empire of the Vampire, but this one did a lot of things right. The audiobook is really good. It is narrated by Steve West himself, and if you want to see kind of like a sinister take on like biblical events as well as like real historical events, I highly recommend it because of the way that it's all tied in. And it seems like magical realism, because if you've ever read the Bible, you know that sometimes like it'll say Jesus turned water into wine, and it doesn't feel like fantasy, it just feels like magical realism or like miracles happening on paper. That is exactly how the book is written. The book is written in a way that makes you feel like you are actually reading stories from the Bible. So really good. The next book that I read was Rock, Paper, Scissors, which I think I gave 4 out of 5 stars. We are following this like unstable marriage as this husband and his wife take a vacation to like the Rocky Mountains of like Scotland, I think. And as they're there, they pretty much have to come face to face and confront a lot of the problems that they've been having in their marriages. I thought it was a very atmospheric mood twist that made sense for like the story that she was telling. It wasn't mind-blowing. Honestly, like now that I've read it like a month ago, it feels very forgettable, but I did enjoy it when I was reading it, and I read it when it was cold outside, so I definitely recommend this for a seasonal read if you are interested. The next book was included in the same vlog that I read this book in, and I will leave it in the cards above for you guys to go and watch. That is Gone Girl, which I gave 2 stars. I felt like it depended too much on a suspended belief on behalf of the reader, and there is a huge shift 50% into the book that I did not care for. But I also read Sometimes I Lie, which is also by Alex Feeney. I liked this one. It made me kind of uncomfortable. I couldn't decide what to rate it. It's somewhere between a 3.5 and a 5-star read, but that was definitely the better book from the blog, because again, now that I'm a month away from reading it, that is the book that sticks with me the most, and that's the one that I remember the most about. Like I said, Rock, Paper, Scissors was very atmospheric, and I enjoyed it when I was reading it, especially during the time that I read it in. But Sometimes I Lie is the book that's like leaves a better imprint, or left a better imprint on me. Next, I read Daisy Jones and the Six. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed the audiobook. I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the relationship dynamic between our 2 main characters, Daisy and I can't think of his name right now. I forgot his name, so sorry. Daisy and this other guy had a very complicated relationship, and I enjoyed that aspect. However, I will say that I enjoyed the final revival of Opal and Nev a little more, because I did give that one 5 stars. Still highly recommend Daisy Jones and the Six, highly recommend the audiobook, but I also recommend in conjunction that you read the final revival of Opal and Nev, because that book slapped. The next book that I read was Vengeful, and unfortunately I had to DNF this book because it's not that the book was bad. Vengeful is a good book. I had a problem with it as a sequel. I felt like it was imbalanced in terms of like where we left off in book 1. I would have enjoyed this book so much more if it was a companion novel, or if it was a sequel that did not follow our main characters from book 1, or only followed our main characters from book 1. The balance between us following Victor and Eli again, and then the new characters that she introduced, it just felt like 2 separate books that was moving disharmonious from one another, and I did not like that. It's so hard to explain because it is not a bad book, and I get why people enjoy it. It's just, if you call it a sequel, it forces you to compare it to book 1, which is Vicious, and it is not a good sequel. Good book, not a good sequel. In December, I will DNF a book with quickness. Like, I have suffered all year. I'm not suffering in December. That's unheard of. We're not doing that. So, still recommended. I just would rather have had the book written differently or marketed differently, not as a sequel, or honestly, we could have just went into the graphic novels, really. So I still plan to read the graphic novels. It just felt like a setup for the graphic novels. Number 7 is Daughter of the Pirate King. This was one that I was not excited for when I did my TBR prompt jar, because I read, what was the name of that freaking book? What was it? The Shadows Between Us. So I read The Shadows Between Us and I hated it. Okay, that was the first and only book I've ever read by Tricia Levenseller, and I decided then and there I was never going to read another book from her again. But the TBR prompt jar had other plans in store for me. I had to pick a book that was a favorite of TikTok, and so when I went to TikTok, that was the first book that I seen multiple times, and I was forced by the jar to read daughter of a pirate king. And I stand by my first analysis and decision to never read another Tricia Levenseller book. This was just as annoying as The Shadows Between Us. Now, Tricia does a really good job of presenting a badass female character that's gonna take no crap, that's ruthless and makes no apologies, and I enjoy that. Like, that's what made me want to read The Shadows Between Us, because it's about this girl who's like destined, or she's like desperate for power and control, and so she decides to like get the king to fall in love with her, and then she's going to kill him. And this daughter of a pirate king is about this girl who's like on this quest to prove to her father that she is warranted and worthy of having her own pirate crew. And she gets captured on purpose because she's like searching for this thing, and she's pretending to be a prisoner, but really she's like the baddest of the baddest bitches ever there was. And I like those. They sound good in theory, and Tricia Levenseller should pitch books and not write them, because her pitches, her ideas, they are there. She should be at the table when they start, brainstorming ideas. She deserves that seat. But when it leaves the brainstorm room and goes into production, she needs to be nowhere near it, because she cannot execute nothing, okay? It falls flat every single time. I regret reading this, and now no matter what happens, no matter what the TBR jar says, I will edit that clip out next time. I won't be reading another one. I should have edited it out when I picked that freaking book. Something told me, but I said, no, I'm gonna be an honorable person. You know what honorable people get? 2-star reads, okay? I should have said that like this is my third glass of wine. So if I'm rambling, sorry. My 8th read of the month was The Empress of Salt and Fortune. I gave this one 4 stars. I will say I was a little conflicted when I was reading it the first time, because when I finished it, I was unsure of what the purpose of the book was supposed to be. We have this storyteller who goes to this place and meets a rabbit or a bunny, and the bunny starts to recount the story of her being a servant for this Empress of Salt and Fortune, who was kind of like outcasted by her husband, and she was like exiled, and so she comes back and she stages a coup and she takes control of the kingdom for herself. And you have a storyteller who's getting a story told by someone about someone. And when I was done with the book, I was just like, was the purpose of the book the bunny? Because if so, it failed. If the purpose of the book was the Empress, it also failed. But if the purpose of this book was the dichotomy and comparisons between folklore and myth and the true story, because the Empress of Salt and Fortune is so far removed from like the events that actually happened, that now there is this whole like idea of like folklore and myths and like just pompous stories or pompous characteristics added to her story, and when you get that in terms of like the truth. And so I text a group chat and I'm just like, if the purpose of this was a comparison between truth and myth and folklore and like real events, then that is a really good book. That's a 5-star book. I'm just unsure as to like the purpose of the story and like what it's supposed to be. And I had not known anything about this, so I decided to go ahead and read When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. And that really clarified things for me and made it like clear that the purpose of the story is not exactly the characters or the people who's telling it or like the story itself. The purpose is like the underlying themes and the comparisons between myth and real life. And so in terms of that, when I like understood what the author was trying to do, I did enjoy it. I was just a little confused from like the beginning, because I was like, it just felt super short and not fleshed out, and I was missing a lot of details, and I'm like, everybody loves this book, so there has to be a reason why people love it. I'm just missing it right now. So I gave The Empress of Salt and Fortune 4 stars, and I gave When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain 3 stars. The 10th book that I read was Rosemary and Rue. This is a book by Shauna McGuire, and I have very conflicted feelings about this one. We follow this character by the name of Toby, and Toby is a changeling, and she lives in the modern world. And she is a knight in like the different Fae kingdoms, or the different Fae in this world have like separate kingdoms, and so like she is a designated like knight for a certain house, and so there's a whole political landscape. But she decides to like exist in the real world and just exist in the background where she's not drawing attention to herself. But she does like detective work, where if someone needs to be found, she will find them and then hand the job over to the big people so that they can come in and do what needs to be done. But one day she gets too close to like this person that she's tracking, and he turns her into a koi fish, and she falls into this pond for like 10 years. I kid you not. I think she falls in the pond in 1995, and she comes out in like 2007, 2008, it's a big time jump. She has been living as a koi fish in this pond because she got too close to this guy. And when she comes out, before she went in, she had a fiance that she was like marrying and in love with. They had a daughter together, and they don't know, the daughter and the husband did not know who she was. She can't really reveal herself. And so when she comes out of this koi fish curse, she can't tell them where she's been, so she just seems to be a deadbeat mother. So Toby is done with all of like the fake politics until one day she gets a call from one of her closest friends, one of her only friends, who pretty much is like, you need to help me, you need to do like this background work, you need to investigate this thing. And she's calling Toby back to back, but Toby's not answering her phone. And in the last voicemail, she knows she's going to die, but instead of running, she curses Toby and binds her on voicemail to figuring out who murdered her, because she just feels like she has to do, like, I don't know, it's confusing because if Toby's your friend, wouldn't you want to investigate your death anyway? I don't know, but yeah, she curses her via voicemail, and Toby now is like tied to this mystery, and so she doesn't figure out who murdered her friend. She's going to suffer the same fate because her friend decided that before she died, the last thing she was going to do instead of running for safety would be to curse Toby to find out who killed her. Very weird. The world is very interesting. The setup is interesting. How everything works. I think that is one of the more well done urban fantasies that I have read in a long time. I do recommend it to people if you're looking to like jump back into like modern or jump back into like classic urban fantasies. This is a really good one. In terms of Shauna Maguire, personally, I think that I only vibe with her novellas because I tried to read Middle Game. And I did enjoy Middle Game, but it started to feel like it was lagging in the middle of the book. And there's a line that I explicitly remember from Middle Game where the character says, you cannot jump to the end of the story just because you're tired of being stuck in the middle. And I felt like that was a direct jab at me because I was tired as hell of being stuck in the middle of her story. And I felt the same way when I was reading this one. It's not even a long book. It just starts to lag for some reason for me personally. So I only gave this one 2 stars. I do recommend it to people, but in terms of like me, if Seasonal Fears does the same thing, that would be the 3rd book that I felt like had a very strong beginning and a very strong ending, and like the middle just kind of lost me. I stopped caring. And so if that happens with Seasonal Fears, I know that I am only going to stick with Shauna Maguire's novellas because it seems like those stories just wrap up in like the perfect time frame. And I can't even say that it's because I'm only used to her novellas, because I read the novellas and Middle Game at the same time. I just enjoyed the novellas so much more. Like, I don't think that she is an author that I can read a full story from. The next book that I read was The Heir of Novren. This was a top read of the year for me, 5 out of 5 stars. It made me feel whole. And that's very different for me because I normally like to be broken and shattered at the end of my series, but this one felt like a warm hug, and I will forever love Michael J. Sullivan for that feeling. I love these books. I cannot recommend them enough. I can't really talk about what happens in this book because it is a finale to a trilogy, so it would just all be spoilers at this point, but this is my sign to you to pick up Death of Swords and to read it because I don't think that you would regret it. Like, those books are just top tier. Book number 12. Why are we only on book 12? Book number 12 is Steel Striker, which is the conclusion to Marie Lou's, what is it called? Sky Hunter. It is the conclusion to Marie Lou's Sky Hunter duology. I rated the overall duology a 3.5 out of 5 because I have changed the way that I rate books. I no longer rate individual books in a series that I plan to finish. Like, if I decide to stop reading before it's done, then I will rate it like up until that point. But if I'm going all the way through to the end for a duology, a trilogy, or a quartet, I will rate overall the whole thing. So I rated this whole duology a 3.5 out of 5 between the first 2 books. I felt like this was a fairly strong ending to the duology. And yeah, it would again be spoilers, but if you are unsure about what Sky Hunter, which is book 1, is about, we're following this refugee of war by the name of Talon, and Talon is someone who doesn't speak, so she uses sign language, and she joins the military of the country that she found refuge in to try to stop this imperial country or like regime from taking over called the Federation. And they have this science experiment that they're operating on humans and turning them to like superhumans or like super soldiers, and they turn them basically into sky hunters, and she is determined to take down the Federation. Book number 13 is The Keeper of Night, another book that I DNF'd. I enjoyed the prose, I enjoyed the writing, but for some reason it was just not holding my attention. That may be because I tried to listen to this book on audio, and audiobooks are a hit or miss for me. I know that now personally, if I don't enjoy a book because of audio, a book that I was expecting to enjoy, I usually try to go back and read it physically, because it may have been the audiobook that was throwing me off. But yeah, when I was trying to read this one, it just was not holding my attention. I kept like just blipping out and I wasn't sure about what was going on, but I did enjoy the writing. This author is scheduled to produce like 3 or 4 more books, 2 of which I think are coming out in 2022 now, and so I do want to read more books from her, but I haven't unhauled this because it may have just been the audiobook. If you don't know what Keeper of Night is about, we're following this character who has been outcasted because she's like half Reaper, half Shinigami, and something happens to where she has to like leave Britain and try to find refuge with her Shinigami heritage in Japan. And so they kind of like sneak into Japan because it is set in a time period where they're no longer accepting outsiders. Like, it's a period of isolation where Japan was like, it had closed all its borders. And when she gets there, she is tasked with hunting out this spirit, and pretty much the story just unfolds from there. I'm getting tired, y'all. Book number 14, I read the entire Bear and Nightingale trilogy. That is The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower, and The Winter of the Witch. I rated this entire trilogy 4 out of 5 stars. It is a new favorite for me. Book number 3 broke me. I had such a fun time reading these books. If you don't know what they are about, we're following this character by the name of Vasya. Vasya is a girl born of myth and folklore and magic, and she's trying to exist in a real world where Christianity is rising up and is like dogmatic views and is trying to dominate the religious world and like root out paganism. She is someone who can like see the pagan deities, and she knows how much they contribute to her society, and she's targeted a lot as like this weird outcasted witchy girl because of the rising fear and like just dedication to Christianity. And so she suffers a lot of things, including like being almost burned at the stake, because she is trying to exist in a world that is not exactly big enough for her, and it just goes from there. So there is a conflict between the Mongol Empire and some of the vassal kings in Russia, pagan and Christianity, and just this girl who is too feministic and free and liberal for the time period that she's alive in, and they want her to be boxed up in a man's world. And so it talks about a lot of gender as well. I really enjoyed these books. I do feel like the writing in book 1 is very grandiose and pompous for no reason, and so there's that. I don't recommend the audiobooks because I think the audiobooks were terrible, but other than that, I really enjoyed the series. Why do I feel like I'm not moving it fast enough? Book number 15 I read was Razor Blade Tears. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook. I think that there are so many things that the author did right in terms of like race and classism in this book. I feel like sometimes people only focus on race and just black versus white. And I feel like the author of this book did so much in terms of race, but also classism, which really plays a part in how we experience the world. We have this black father and white father whose sons were married, and they were in a homosexual marriage, and they suffered like a terrible and brutal death. And these are 2 men who never really accepted their son's lifestyle as gay men, but it just eats at them that their murders are going unsolved. And so they team up together to try to do their own background research as to who killed their sons. Both are ex-convicts that have gotten out of jail for murder. And so it's a very thrilling read because they are not afraid to get their hands dirty or bloody to figure out what happened to their sons, to try to honor the memory of them and be the fathers in death that they weren't able to be in life. I really enjoyed the depiction of like the white father because he is someone that people think have like all this privilege. However, he was raised poor, and he also went to jail, and he lives in a trailer, and he's just like, I don't know what this privilege is that y'all think I have, because I have a box crate, like a milk crate for a dining room table, and you, the black person, owns a business, you got out of jail, you rehabilitated yourself, you own a house, you have a real coffee table, and I'm trailer trash. I don't think that that is something that is discussed enough, that there are many nuances to the experiences that we have as minorities in America, and not all of them are always race. Sometimes the experience that you go through is a result of classism, and that there are black people who have better experiences than white people because they are of a higher class. The conflicts that you have with race and things that happen to you because of race can coincide with the things that happen to you because of your status and like tax bracket and how much money you bring in. But those are two completely different groups, and I feel like the author touched on this in bite-sized pieces, and I hope that this sparks a flame for more people to really dive into that as well, because as much as racism is a part of America, classism in a capitalistic world is another really, really big one, and I would like to see more authors cover this as well. The book number 16 is A House at the Bottom of the Lake. I gave this one 3 stars. We have 2 white teenagers that are on a date, and they're like going canoeing, and they look at the bottom of the lake and they see this house, and they're like, it is our duty, our obligation as 2 white teenagers to swim to the bottom of the lake and go into this house. And when they go into this house, it consists of like several like speculative elements or like magical realism, and they decide to claim the house as theirs because that just feels right to do, and the story just kind of unfolds from there of them existing in this magical house. I thought that the ending was rather lackluster, and it did not tie the story up in a neat enough boat for me, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. But it is a very short novella type book. I have no interest in reading anything else the author has put out, but it was a moment. I read it. Book number 17 is Soulsmith. This is book 2 in the Cradle series. This follows a kid who is born weaker than other people in his society that can possess aura, which is like this magical ability of like strength, and he is from the Sacred Valley, and he is pretty much like ostracized from his community, and he is determined to go out and build strength. And I don't want to talk about what happens in book 2 because it would be spoilers, but that's like essentially the gist of this series. It is like very shonen and like anime-esque, or anime shows that just have like an underdog character who like rises in strength and power after being like beaten down time and time again. Highly recommend this. The writing in book 2 was so much better than book 1. The world expansion was so much better. The character development was so much better. It's still by far not a perfect series, but considering that the bar was in hell with book 1, we're now maybe like we're grass level, not even grass, we're dirt. There's still grass, but like we're dirt level. But we were in hell before, so like progress, right? The 18th book that I read was The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This one was a very interesting time. I did not expect to enjoy the writing and the prose of this book as much as I did. This has so many elements of like storytelling, magical realism, whimsical fantasy aspects that I love about a book, but it took a more dark, horrific turn, and I am very interested to read more from this author because that is what I am here for. I want to read more books like that. So Neil Gaiman definitely got a check mark in my book, and I cannot wait to finish Neverwhere because I started reading that, but I paused it because I was just burnt out on reading because I read so many books in December. But yeah, The Ocean at the End of the Lane was a very fun time. 19 is The Shadowed Sun. This is the conclusion to the Dream Blood duology. I gave the entire duology 4 stars. This was a much stronger book than book 1, and I am glad that I was able to read it. As soon as I was done with it, I immediately wanted to go back and like reread the series because it was just that good. Like, N.K. Jemisin is just such a talented author. I am tired. 20. We are so close to being done. Book number 20 was Sweet Hand. I thought that this was really cute. It's a romance book between these 2 characters. One is a girl who is a baker, and she is home in I think they're in Trinidad. I think that's the island that they're on. There's this guy that has gotten on her nerves pretty much her whole life, the time that they were being raised. So it is kind of like, I don't want to say enemies to lovers, but like they weren't friends. They just grew up in the same circles. And now her sister and his closest friend are getting married, and like they grew up in the same class, so they've always known each other. They've just never really cared for one another. They have gotten on each other's nerves, and the book just follows their romance as it starts to like break off. I thought that it was very cute. I enjoyed it. It was very short and interesting. There were some moments that lagged a bit, but in terms of like a black romance or like black love story, I do want more books like this. I thought the cover was really pretty, and I do recommend it. Then I read The Mask of Mirrors. This was a very interesting read. We have this character by the name of Ren who is a con artist, and she's trying to con her way into this prestigious family that is reputable, but she does not know that this family is actually on its decline and they've been trying to hide it, and they're descending into like bankruptcy in this world. And as she's trying to con her way into this family, she gets caught up in the politics of this world. There is elements of like astrology and the cosmos and different dreams and patterns and readings of like zodiac cards and fates, and something is seeping into the dreams of the people that's happening, and our main character gets wrapped up in that. I know that the plot sounds very convoluted, but that's essentially what the book is about. It's a very slow paced book until like 50% there's a huge shift that like everything you thought you knew about what was happening in the story completely changes, and from 50% to like the end, it is a wild ride with what happens. And I was very thoroughly pleased with like the latter half of the book, but I also feel like, what was the point of the first half? Because like the second half not only was more interesting, but it was just overall better. And I felt like what was packed into the last half of the book could have been redispersed and more evened out. But that's okay. I feel like The Last Magician does that as well, where like everything that matters about that book only happens in the end. So, you know, it was a moment. I read it. I'm not going to rate it again because there is the sequel, which is The Liar's Knot, that I do plan to read soon, and I will share my thoughts on that one as well, but I don't have a rating for that one as of yet. Then I read Before They Are Hanged. This is book 2 in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I will say that I enjoyed book 1 more than I enjoyed book 2. Book 2 made me feel like he was wasting my time, and I have not started book 3 yet because like you won't keep wasting my time like this. Like I have all of the same sentiments that I felt about book 1, about how I feel like I was never really invited into the world. I think he wrote this series for himself and just let all of us have the privilege of witnessing it happen. But yeah, it's definitely a more unorthodox to a series. I don't have a rating for this one. Still very character driven. I still don't know what the plot was. Like if anything, I felt like there was more of a plot in book 1 than there is in book 2, and I'm unsure as to like what's going to happen in the conclusion. However, I was trying to figure out like what I like about Joe Abercrombie's writing, and he reminded me like with his grim aspects, and like he's very character driven, and he can make his characters narrate their descent into chaos. And I like that. I like a self-appointed POV where they can describe like their descent into madness and like insanity, and they're committing all these gruesome and like gory acts of like violence, but they seem like very logical people. Like when you're in their POV and they're talking to you, it seems like you're having a conversation with the most intellectual person ever. But the things that they're doing is like they're unhinged. And as I was thinking about that, I'm like, where have I felt like that before? And it was Edgar Allan Poe, which made me go back and reread The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart. And by just making that comparison, I feel like Joe Abercrombie may be a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe because his story shares a lot in common with that. Because Edgar Allan Poe, like especially with The Black Cat, we have a character who's trying to swear that they're not crazy and they're not insane, but they start to narrate the story, and the story actually justifies their insanity and justifies how unhinged they are, but they're telling the story to justify that they're not. And just the way that it is narrated, because it's also very self-centered POV as well for most of Edgar Allan Poe's writing. And I feel like this First Law trilogy, the brutal scenes pay homage to Edgar Allan Poe, which made me appreciate them even more. And I do see a lot of the big comparisons. We are almost done. 3 more books. I also read The Ladies of the Secret Circus. This was a very interesting read. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. We have this character by the name of Laura. Laura's fiance goes missing, and she discovers that he has gone missing on the same night in the same spot as 4 other men in this town. They all go missing from the same area on the same day, 30 years apart, and all 4 of them have something to do with her family. All 4 of them have had previous relationships with her mother, her grandmother, and so something is tying her family heritage to the disappearances of these people. And she starts to investigate it, but her mom is very secretive about what's happening with the family history, and she doesn't answer a lot of questions. Now, her and her mom have a unexplainable magic element to them, but her mom makes her hide it, and she is determined to find out why. And so she gets a little tidbit one day that her grandmother used to participate in this circus, and she starts to like dive into that as well to figure out like what the circus has to do with her family. And she discovers that like they used to be involved in this very dark circus. It's literally a circus from hell. And from there she starts to investigate what her family has to do with like this demonic circus that's like run by this demon for like very sinister entertainment, and what that has to do with her missing fiance. This is a very fun read. I read it in one day. I opened the book and did not close it until I was done. I read it cover to cover. It's definitely a new favorite for me. One of the last books that I read in December was Fahrenheit 451. I read this because I want to reread the classics that I read in high school and see if I still have the same appreciation for them, to see if I'm still going to like them. I wanted to start with Fahrenheit 451, which is one of the books that I loved when I was in high school. This follows a character by the name of Guy Montag, and he is this firefighter. It's set in a dystopian world where people are burning books. Books are illegal, and a firefighter's history has been rewritten to make people believe that they have only ever burned books and they've never actually put out fires, but they've always started fires. And one day Montag meets this girl who asks him a simple question of whether or not he's happy and if he enjoys burning books. And he's like, of course I do. But the girl starts to like become a catalyst for this unraveling of his entire life. And he starts to question why it is that we have to burn books. What's so evil and terrible about books? And his life just descends into chaos from there. And I am someone who loves dystopias. I have always gravitated towards dystopias. It is what has sparked my love for reading. And so when I read this book in high school, it really ignited my love for dystopias. And I have to say that I love this book much more rereading it as an adult. And then the last book that I read was A Constellation of Roses. This is following a girl who is an orphan, and she has always done everything she needed to survive, and she has this knack for stealing things. Like, she can steal almost anything without getting caught, and it's kind of like her hidden talent. And one day she gets caught up by like the system, and they give her a choice between going to jail and serving her time and charging her like almost as an adult for theft because someone else turned her in, or she can go live with this estranged family of her father's side. But she has never known anything about her father. Her mother has never shared information about her father, and she decided that she was going to stay with them long enough to run away so that she can avoid jail time. But when she gets to meet his family, she discovers that they all have some type of magical element to them, and they live in this small remote country town, and she starts to discover that there is a way for her to find a family again after being abandoned by her mother. It's a book that has a very huge takeaway. It's very age appropriate but hard hitting for the age group that it is in. I feel like this is a YA book that is again age appropriate, that will expose the reader, the YA reader, to things and like experiences that they may not understand. And if it is something that they can relate to, it's a book that would make them feel seen. And I just love following the story of this family, just showing her love and not necessarily forcing her back into childhood, but making it safe for her to be worried about things a child should be worried about. Not where she's going to get her next meal from, how she's going to pay for a motel, but like the school dance and crushing on boys and just, you know, college stuff, like simple stuff. I just love how they provided such a safe environment for her. And I enjoyed the magical realism. That is something that I always really enjoy in books, and it just felt very wholesome to watch this girl go from having to survive on the streets and doing very dangerous things to finally finding the family that she was not able to be exposed to for most of her life. And those are all of the books that I read in the month of December, and I am tired, so I will see you guys next time.